Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Gregory Reed's Toyota Camry rolled to a stop in front of his modest two-story home, the engine's low rumble fading into the quiet suburban afternoon. The history teacher's fingers drummed on the steering wheel, a mix of excitement and fatigue coursing through him. The conference had wrapped up early, a stroke of luck that allowed him to surprise Natasha with his unexpected return. As he killed the engine, Gregory's eyes narrowed at the sight of an unfamiliar Audi parked in their driveway. Its sleek lines and polished surface seemed out of place next to Natasha's practical sedan. "Huh," he muttered, climbing out of his car. Maybe Linda from next door got a new ride. The thought felt hollow even as it formed, a feeble attempt to rationalize the unease growing in his gut. The house was quiet as he entered, the silence broken only by the soft thud of his bag hitting the hardwood floor. Gregory paused, listening intently. There it was, muffled voices drifting down from upstairs, barely audible but unmistakably present. His footsteps were deliberately slow and soft as he approached the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a thunderclap in the stillness. At the bottom of the staircase, Gregory tilted his head, straining to make out the words. Natasha's voice, low and sultry, reached his ears. "I can't wait to see you tonight, baby. It's going to be wild." The words hung in the air, each syllable a dagger to Gregory's heart. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not after 14 years of marriage. His mind raced, searching for an innocent explanation, but finding none. With each step up the stairs, the reality of the situation became harder to deny. He found Natasha in their bedroom, phone pressed to her ear, a coy smile playing on her lips, a smile he hadn't seen directed at him in months. "Natasha?" His voice cracked, betraying the turmoil within. She whirled around, eyes wide with shock, the smile vanishing instantly. "Greg, I thought you weren't due back until tomorrow." Her voice was higher than usual, tinged with panic. "Clearly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to spin around him, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien and hostile. "Who were you talking to?" Natasha's face hardened, her initial surprise morphing into defiance. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that Gregory wondered if he'd ever really known her at all. "It's none of your business, Greg," she spat, her tone dripping with contempt. "None of my business? You're my wife, for Christ's sake." The words exploded from him, fueled by a mixture of pain and incredulity. How could she stand there, in the bedroom they shared, and tell him this was none of his business? "Oh, grow up," Natasha sneered, rolling her eyes. The gesture was so dismissive, so callous, that Gregory felt as if he'd been physically struck. "Did you really think I was going to be satisfied with your boring, predictable life forever?" Gregory staggered back as if he'd been slapped, his mind reeling. "What are you saying?" The question was unnecessary. He knew exactly what she was saying. But some part of him, the part that still clung to the memory of their wedding day, of whispered promises and shared dreams, needed to hear it out loud. Natasha's laugh was sharp and cruel, a sound Gregory had never heard from her before. "I'm saying I've found someone who actually excites me, someone who isn't afraid to live a little." She tossed her hair back, a gesture of defiance and superiority. "You're having an affair?" The words felt like ash in Gregory's mouth, bitter and choking. "Affairs are for bored housewives," Natasha spat, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and what looked disturbingly like triumph. "I'm embracing life. And tonight, I'm embracing my new lover." Gregory's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Not after 14 years of marriage. Not to him. He'd been a good husband, hadn't he? Faithful, supportive, loving. Where had it all gone wrong? "You can't be serious," he managed, his voice hoarse. "You're not going anywhere." Natasha laughed again, the sound grating against Gregory's nerves. "Oh, sorry, but I promised him a wild night. And unlike you, I keep my promises." The barb struck home, twisting in Gregory's chest like a knife. "If you walk out that door," Gregory said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage, "our marriage is over. 14 years, Natasha. Gone." It was meant to be an ultimatum, a line in the sand. But even as he said it, Gregory knew it was futile. Natasha shouldered past him, pausing only to grab her purse from the dresser. "Maybe you should have made those 14 years count for something," she tossed over her shoulder, her words dripping with disdain. The front door slammed, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Gregory stood frozen in the bedroom, the suddenly too large space mocking him with its emptiness. Natasha's laughter, cruel and triumphant, seemed to linger in the air, a ghostly reminder of how quickly his world had crumbled. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Gregory felt his knees buckle. He sank onto the edge of their bed, and buried his face in his hands. How had he not seen this coming? How had he been so blind? The questions swirled in his mind, each one bringing a fresh wave of pain and disbelief. Outside, the sound of an engine roaring to life cut through his thoughts. Natasha's car, or perhaps the mysterious Audi, pulling away, carrying her towards her new life, her new lover, leaving Gregory behind with nothing but the shattered remains of the life he thought they'd built together. Sleep eluded Gregory that night, each tick of the bedside clock a mocking reminder of his solitude. He tossed and turned, his mind a whirlwind of memories and questions. The bed, once a sanctuary of comfort and intimacy, now felt vast and cold. How long had this been going on? How could he have been so blind? The questions circled endlessly, each one bringing a fresh wave of pain and disbelief. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Gregory dragged himself out of bed. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed and haggard, with stubble shadowing his usually clean-shaven jaw. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shock himself back to reality. But reality, he was learning, was a cruel and unforgiving thing. Downstairs, the kitchen stood silent, devoid of the usual morning bustle. No coffee brewing, no gentle clink of spoons against cereal bowls, no murmured conversations about the day ahead. Just emptiness and the harsh light of day that seemed to illuminate every crack in the facade of his marriage. Gregory's hands shook as he poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter liquid a poor substitute for the comfort he craved. He needed answers, and he knew where to start looking. The home office had always been Natasha's domain, a space he'd respected out of trust and a belief in privacy within marriage. Now, that respect felt like a cruel joke, a weakness she had exploited. With a deep breath, Gregory pushed open the office door. The room was neat and organized, just as Natasha always kept it. But now, every orderly stack of papers, every carefully arranged knick-knack, seemed to mock him. He began rifling through drawers, searching for anything that might shed light on her betrayal. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns, he found what he was looking for: credit card statements, carefully concealed from their joint account. His eyes widened as he scanned the charges: expensive restaurants, hotel stays, lavish gifts. All dated back months, possibly longer. "Jesus," he muttered, sinking into the office chair. The affair hadn't just been going on for weeks or months. This was a long-term deception, a carefully orchestrated betrayal that spanned a significant portion of their marriage. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless and nauseous. As he sat there, trying to process the magnitude of Natasha's betrayal, something caught his eye, a faint glow coming from beneath a stack of papers on her desk. Gregory's hand trembled as he reached for it, already knowing what he would find. A burner phone. Of course, he should have known. It was almost comically cliché, like something out of a bad detective novel. But there was nothing funny about the sick feeling in his stomach as he turned it on. The screen lit up, revealing a cascade of text messages. His stomach churned as he scrolled through them, each one more intimate and explicit than the last. Pet names, inside jokes, plans for rendezvous, A whole secret life laid bare in digital form. And there, repeated over and over, was a name, James Humphrey. Gregory's breath caught in his throat. James Humphrey, Natasha's co-worker. The man Gregory had shared drinks with at the company Christmas party just months ago. The man who had shaken his hand, called him buddy, all while secretly carrying on an affair with his wife. The betrayal was suddenly, horrifyingly personal. Memories flooded back. Natasha's increased hours at work, her sudden interest in after-work drinks with colleagues, the way she and James had laughed together at that Christmas party. It all made sickening sense now. How many times had he stood by, smiling and unsuspecting, while they exchanged knowing glances? How many of their conversations had been laced with double meanings, inside jokes at his expense? Gregory's world, already teetering on the edge, came crashing down around him. He felt as if he were falling, spiraling into an abyss of betrayal and deceit. The room spun around him, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien and hostile. He barely made it to the bathroom before he was violently sick, his body purging itself as if it could somehow expel the pain and humiliation along with the contents of his stomach. As he slumped against the cool porcelain, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The initial shock was passing, replaced by a cold, hard anger. He thought of his students, of the lessons he taught them about resilience in the face of adversity, about standing up for what was right. It was time to practice what he preached. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone. He had calls to make, plans to set in motion. Natasha might have betrayed him, but he'd be damned if he let her destroy him. As he dialed the first number, Gregory felt a determination settle over him. The battle for his future was just beginning. Morning found Gregory slumped at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone. The house around him was silent, the usual morning bustle replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to mock his solitude. He'd called in sick to work, unable to face his students in this state. The thought of standing in front of a classroom, discussing the great events of history while his own life lay in ruins, was more than he could bear. His mind raced with possible courses of action, each one more drastic than the last. Confront Natasha at her office? Track down James and demand an explanation? Simply pack his bags and disappear? The options swirled in his head. A dizzying array of potential futures, none of them resembling the life he'd thought he had just days ago. The buzz of his phone startled him out of his reverie. It was Michael Roy, his friend since college, and now a respected lawyer. Gregory had reached out to him in a moment of desperation the night before, his message a garbled mix of shock and plea for help. "Hey, Greg." Michael's voice was calm and steady, a lifeline in the chaos of Gregory's thoughts. "How are you holding up?" Gregory let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. "How do you think?" "Listen," Michael said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. "I know you're hurting, but we need to approach this logically. Have you confronted Natasha again?" "No," Gregory admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "She didn't come home last night." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of how quickly his life had unraveled. "Good," Michael said, and Gregory could almost see him nodding approvingly. "Don't confront her until we have a solid plan. For now, focus on gathering evidence. Bank statements, text messages, anything that proves the affair. We need to build a strong case." As Michael outlined the legal options, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was no longer about saving his marriage. That ship had sailed the moment Natasha walked out the door. This was about survival, about emerging from this nightmare with his dignity and future intact. "What about the house?" Gregory asked, his eyes roaming over the familiar surroundings that now felt tainted by betrayal. "The savings? Our whole life is tied up together. One step at a time," Michael advised. "First, we document everything. Then we'll look at division of assets." "But Greg," his voice softened slightly, "are you sure you want to go through with this? There's no coming back once we start the legal process." Gregory's grip tightened on the phone. Was he sure? The question gave him pause. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine reconciliation. Natasha returning, apologetic and remorseful. The two of them working through this, rebuilding their marriage. But the fantasy crumbled as quickly as it formed, replaced by the cold reality of Natasha's sneering face, her callous words. "I'm sure," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "She made her choice. Now I'm making mine." After hanging up, Gregory set to work with a single-minded focus that would have impressed his students. He meticulously copied financial records, saved text messages, and documented every scrap of evidence he could find. It was like conducting research for one of his history lessons, except this time, the subject was the destruction of his own life. Hours passed in a blur of paperwork and digital forensics. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the kitchen, when Gregory's phone buzzed again. A text from Natasha. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Gregory stared at the message, a mix of anger and resolve coursing through him. The casual tone, the blatant lie. It was all so breathtakingly audacious. Did she think he was still in the dark? Or did she simply not care anymore? He thought of the scout law he'd learned as a boy. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Values he'd tried to live by. Values he'd thought he shared with Natasha. Well, he thought bitterly, it was time to add a new trait to that list. Ruthless. Gregory's fingers hovered over the phone, tempted to fire back a response that would shatter Natasha's illusion of secrecy. But Michael's advice echoed in his mind. Don't confront her yet. Build the case. Be smart. With a deep breath, Gregory set the phone aside. He had work to do. Tomorrow, he would return to his classroom, face his students, and teach them about the great upheavals of history. And all the while, he would be planning his own revolution, the dismantling of the life he'd built with Natasha and the construction of something new from the ashes. As night fell, Gregory stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, Natasha was with James, living her new life, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Let her have her night, Gregory thought. The reckoning would come soon enough. With a smile, he turned away from the window and headed back to the office. There was still much to do, and the night was young. The Gregory Reed who had left for that conference just days ago was gone, replaced by a man tempered by betrayal and resolved to fight for his future. Gregory Reed stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the calendar on the wall. A week had passed since his world had imploded, each day a careful dance of normalcy and secret preparations. The red circle around today's date seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of the task ahead. He took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. Natasha had always been the one to make the coffee. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the day's agenda. The bank would be his first stop. Gregory had spent hours poring over their financial records, calculating exactly half of their joint savings. It wasn't about greed. It was about survival. He'd be damned if he'd let Natasha's betrayal leave him destitute. As he rinsed his mug in the sink, Gregory caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him was a stranger hollow-eyed, with a week's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He barely recognized himself. Good, he thought. Let Natasha come home to a stranger. Let her see what her betrayal had wrought. The drive to the bank was a blur, Gregory's mind racing with contingencies and worst-case scenarios. What if Natasha had beaten him to it? What if she'd already cleaned out their accounts? But the teller's smile was professional and untroubled as she processed his withdrawal. Gregory felt a twinge of guilt as he tucked the cashier's check into his briefcase. It felt like theft, even though he knew it was his right. His next stop was a real estate agent's office. The woman behind the desk, Sarah, greeted him with a warm smile that faltered slightly as she took in his haggard appearance. "Mr. Reed, are you all right?" Gregory managed a wan smile. "Just a rough week. You said on the phone you had some properties to show me." Sarah nodded, pulling out a folder. "Yes, I've got a few options that might suit your needs. You said you were looking for something modest, right?" A fresh start. The words hit Gregory like a punch to the gut. A fresh start. As if 14 years of marriage could be wiped away that easily. That's right, he said, his voice rough. Something uncomplicated. As Sarah began to outline the various properties, Gregory found his mind wandering. He thought of the house he was leaving behind, the home he and Natasha had built together, the kitchen where they'd shared countless meals, the living room where they'd curled up on the couch, planning their future. All of it tainted now. All of it a lie. Mr. Reed, Sarah's voice snapped him back to the present. Did you hear me? I said this apartment might be perfect for you. It's paid month to month. So there's no long-term commitment. Gregory nodded, forcing himself to focus. That sounds ideal. Can we go see it? The apartment was small but clean, with a view of a nearby park. As Sarah pointed out its features, Gregory found himself imagining a life here, a life without Natasha, without betrayal. I'll take it, he said, cutting Sarah off mid-sentence. She blinked, surprised. Don't you want to think it over? Maybe discuss it with your wife. The question was like a knife twisting in his gut. Gregory managed a tight smile. That won't be necessary. How soon can I move in? An hour later, Gregory stood in the empty apartment, key in hand. The bare walls and vacant rooms seemed to echo with possibility. He took a deep breath, feeling something close to peace for the first time in days. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Michael, his lawyer friend. Everything set? Gregory typed a quick response. All done. No turning back now. As he hit send, Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The pieces were in place. The stage was set. Let the next act begin. The house was quiet when Gregory returned, the silence heavy with anticipation. He moved through the rooms with purpose, gathering the last of his essential belongings. Each object he touched seemed to hold a memory, some bitter, some sweet, all of them painful now. The sun was setting when he heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Gregory's heart raced, a mix of dread and determination coursing through him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment of truth. Natasha's keys jingled in the lock. Gregory positioned himself in the living room, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table before him. He heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Coming closer. Greg, Natasha's voice held a note of surprise. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Gregory reached out and flicked on the lamp beside him. Natasha blinked in the sudden light, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. What's all this? She asked, her tone dismissive. But Gregory could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. Divorce papers, Gregory said, his voice steady. I think it's time we stop pretending, don't you? Natasha's laugh was sharp and brittle. Don't be ridiculous, Greg. You're not going to divorce me. No. Gregory raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you'd like to explain these? He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. All the evidence of her affair laid bare. The color drained from Natasha's face. You've been going through my things? Her voice rose, indignant. How dare you? How dare I? Gregory's laugh was harsh. That's rich, coming from you. How long has it been going on, Natasha? How long have you been screwing James behind my back? Natasha's eyes flashed with anger. You don't understand anything, Greg. James and I, we have something special. Something real. Something real? Gregory shook his head in disbelief. Was our marriage not real enough for you? 14 years, Natasha. 14 years of trust and commitment. Or was that all a lie, too? For a moment, Natasha's mask slipped. Gregory saw a flicker of something, regret, shame, cross her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold determination. You want to know the truth, Greg? Fine. I've been unhappy for years. You and your safe, boring life. It was suffocating me. James makes me feel alive. Each word was like a dagger to Gregory's heart, but he steeled himself, refusing to let her see how deeply she'd wounded him. Well, I hope it was worth it, he said, his voice cold. Because it's cost you everything. The house, our savings. I'm taking half of it all. It's only fair, don't you think? Panic flashed across Natasha's face. You can't do that. I can and I have, Gregory replied. It's all there in the papers. You might want to have your lawyer look them over. Oh, wait. I guess that would be a conflict of interest for James, wouldn't it? Natasha's composure crumbled. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. This isn't fair, Greg. You can't just throw away 14 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away, Gregory said, his voice quiet but firm. You did, the moment you decided that your vows meant nothing. Natasha's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, Gregory felt a pang of sympathy, but then he remembered the cruel laugh, the callous words she'd thrown at him a week ago. His heart hardened. Sign the papers, Natasha, he said. It's over. As Natasha sank onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The confrontation he dreaded for days was over. The truth was out. Now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces and move forward. Alone, the news of Gregory and Natasha's impending divorce spread through their social circle like wildfire. It seemed that everyone had an opinion, a side to choose, a judgment to pass. Gregory sat in his new apartment, staring at his phone as it buzzed with yet another message. This one was from Sarah, a mutual friend he and Natasha had known for years. Greg, I just heard. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do... He sighed, tossing the phone aside. The messages had been pouring in all week. Some supportive, some accusatory, all of them exhausting. It seemed that Natasha had been busy, spinning her own version of events. According to her, Gregory had been controlling, suffocating her with his mundane lifestyle. She painted herself as the victim, trapped in a loveless marriage, finally finding happiness with James. It was a compelling narrative, one that many of their friends seemed all too willing to believe. Gregory's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Michael. How are you holding up? His lawyer friend asked when Gregory answered. Gregory let out a bitter laugh. Oh, just great. Half our friends think I'm some kind of monster, and the other half are too afraid of taking sides to even talk to me. But other than that, I'm peachy. Michael's voice was sympathetic but firm. Remember what we talked about, Greg. Don't engage. Don't try to defend yourself. The truth will come out in time. Easy for you to say, Gregory muttered. You're not the one being vilified. After hanging up, Gregory paced the small apartment, feeling caged. He needed to get out, to do something, anything to escape the suffocating weight of his thoughts. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, only to freeze as he opened it. Standing in the hallway, hand raised to knock, was Linda, his next-door neighbor from his old house. Greg, she said, her eyes wide with surprise. I wasn't sure you'd be here. Gregory stepped back, gesturing for her to come in. Linda, what are you doing here? Linda fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to talk to you about everything that's happened. As they sat on Gregory's sparse furniture, Linda's eyes darted around the apartment, taking in the boxes still unpacked, the general air of impermanence. Greg, I don't know what to say. Natasha's been telling everyone such horrible things about you, but I couldn't believe it. Not the Greg I've known for years. Gregory felt a lump form in his throat. Here, finally, was someone who wasn't buying into Natasha's lies. Thank you, Linda, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You have no idea how much that means to me. Linda reached out, patting his hand. I know it's not my place, but is there any chance of reconciliation? Maybe if you two just talked. Gregory shook his head, a sad smile on his face. It's too late for that, Linda. The trust is gone. There's no coming back from what she's done. As Linda left, promising to stay in touch, Gregory felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, not all was lost. There were still people who believed in him, who saw through Natasha's lies. But the relief was short-lived. The next day, as Gregory walked into the teacher's lounge at school, he was met with uncomfortable silence. Conversation stopped abruptly. Eyes darted away from his. He poured himself a cup of coffee, acutely aware of the whispers starting up behind him. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of two of his colleagues, their heads bent close together. "I heard he was cheating on her for years," one whispered. "Poor Natasha. No wonder she left him." The words hit Gregory like a physical blow. He stumbled out of the lounge, barely making it to his classroom before the tears came. As he sat at his desk, struggling to compose himself before his students arrived, Gregory felt the full weight of his new reality crash down upon him. This wasn't just about losing Natasha. It was about losing his entire life as he knew it. But as the first bell rang and students began to file in, Gregory took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. He may have lost much, but he still had his integrity. He still had the truth. And someday, somehow, that truth would come out. Until then, he would hold his head high and face each day with dignity. It was all he had left. Gregory Reed stood at the back of the crowded gymnasium, watching as the school board members shuffled papers and cleared their throats. The air was thick with tension, and Gregory could feel the anxiety radiating from his colleagues. Principal Dawson stepped up to the microphone. "As you all know, our district is facing severe budget cuts due to the recent economic downturn. We've been asked to reduce our staff by 15% across all departments." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Gregory's stomach churned. As one of the newer teachers in the history department, he knew his position was precarious. "We'll be evaluating each position carefully," Dawson continued, her voice straining to sound reassuring. "Seniority will be a factor, but not the only one. Performance reviews, student feedback, and extracurricular involvement will all be considered." Gregory's mind raced. He'd always received positive reviews, and his students seemed to enjoy his classes. But would it be enough? The mortgage on his new apartment loomed large in his thoughts. As the meeting adjourned, Gregory found himself cornered by Tom Halsey, the department head. "Greg," Tom said, his voice low, "I won't sugarcoat it. You're on the bubble. If you want to keep your job, you need to make yourself indispensable. Take on extra duties, start a new club, anything to stand out." Gregory nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I understand, Tom. I'll do whatever it takes." As he walked to his car, Gregory's phone buzzed. A text from Michael, his lawyer. "Natasha's contesting the settlement. She's hired Jameson. We need to talk." Gregory's heart sank. Stanley Jameson was known as a shark in divorce court, aggressive and ruthless. This was going to get ugly. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and early mornings. Gregory threw himself into his work, volunteering for every committee and extracurricular activity he could. He started a debate club, organized a field trip to the state capitol, and even coached the JV basketball team when the regular coach fell ill. But even as he fought to keep his job, the specter of the divorce battle loomed large. Jameson was living up to his reputation, contesting every aspect of the settlement and dragging Gregory's name through the mud. One afternoon, as Gregory was grading papers in the teacher's lounge, he overheard two colleagues whispering. "I heard his wife left him because he was emotionally abusive," one said. "Can you believe it? He always seemed so nice." "Well, you never know what goes on behind closed doors," the other replied. "I feel bad for her, having to work with that James guy now that everyone knows about the affair." Gregory's pen froze mid-sentence. He'd known Natasha was telling her version of events, but he hadn't realized how far the rumors had spread. The urge to stand up and defend himself was overwhelming, but Michael's words echoed in his head. "Don't engage. Let the truth come out in its own time." With a heavy heart, Gregory gathered his things and left the lounge, the whispers following him down the hall. That night, as he sat in his sparse apartment, Gregory felt the weight of his challenges crushing down on him. His job was at risk. His reputation was in tatters, and the woman he'd loved for 14 years was doing everything in her power to destroy him. For a moment, he considered giving up. Maybe he should just let Natasha have what she wanted, move to a new town, start over completely. But then his eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was from last year's graduation, showing him surrounded by smiling students. They were looking at him with admiration, trust, and respect. Gregory's jaw clenched. No! He wouldn't give up. He'd fight. For his job, for his reputation, and for the truth. Natasha might have betrayed him, but he wouldn't betray himself or the students who counted on him. With renewed determination, Gregory opened his laptop and began planning his next move. The law offices of Branson and Associates were imposing all gleaming glass and polished marble. Gregory felt distinctly out of place as he followed Michael down the long hallway to the conference room. "Remember," Michael muttered as they approached the door, "let me do the talking. Jameson's looking for any reason to paint you as the bad guy." Gregory nodded, straightening his tie. He'd borrowed the suit from Tom Halsey, not wanting to appear in the same clothes he'd worn to the last mediation session. Every detail mattered now. As they entered the room, Gregory's eyes immediately locked with Natasha's. For a moment, he saw a flicker of something. Regret? Uncertainty? But then her face hardened, and she turned away. Jameson was already talking, his voice oily and condescending. "Now, Mr. Reed, I hope you reconsidered your position on the division of assets. My client has been more than generous, considering the circumstances." Michael's reply was calm but firm. "I'm afraid we'll have to disagree on that point, Mr. Jameson. In fact, we have some new information that might change the entire landscape of these proceedings." Gregory watched as Michael slid a manila folder across the table. Jameson opened it, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. "Where did you get this?" Jameson demanded, his composure slipping. "That's not important," Michael replied smoothly. "What matters is what those documents show. Your clients have been less than truthful about their financial situation." Gregory's heart raced as he realized what was happening. During the discovery phase, Michael had uncovered discrepancies in Natasha and James's financial records. Digging deeper, they'd found evidence of embezzlement, company funds being siphoned off to finance their affair. Natasha's face had gone pale. "What is he talking about?" she hissed at Jameson. But Gregory wasn't listening to their frantic whispers. His mind was reeling with the implications of what he'd just learned. Natasha and James hadn't just betrayed him emotionally, they'd committed a crime. As the meeting devolved into chaos, with Jameson demanding to know the source of the information and Michael calmly deflecting, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time since this nightmare began, he held the upper hand. But with that power came a heavy ethical dilemma. What should he do with this information? The right thing would be to report it to the proper authorities. But a darker part of him whispered that this was a leverage he needed to end this battle once and for all. That night, Gregory paced his apartment, weighing his options. The photo of his students caught his eye again, and he paused. What example would he be setting if he used this information for personal gain? How could he look those kids in the eye and teach them about integrity if he compromised his own? With a heavy sigh, Gregory picked up his phone. He'd make an anonymous tip to the company's board of directors, let them investigate and handle it properly. As he dialed the number, Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He might lose some tactical advantage in the divorce proceedings, but he'd keep his conscience clear. And in the end, that was worth more than any settlement. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The company launched an internal investigation, putting Natasha and James under intense scrutiny. Gregory threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to prove his worth to the school. He volunteered to lead a curriculum review committee, putting in long hours to modernize the history department's approach. He organized a school-wide mock election to coincide with the real one, engaging students in the democratic process in a way that had the whole school buzzing. One afternoon, as Gregory was leaving a particularly grueling department meeting, Tom Halsey pulled him aside. I don't know how you're doing it, Greg, Tom said, shaking his head in admiration. With everything going on in your personal life, most people would be falling apart. But you're thriving. Gregory managed a small smile. I guess I just realized that my work, my students, they're what really matter. Everything else is just noise. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Well, keep it up. When the final decisions come down about staffing, I want to make sure your name is at the top of the keep list. As Gregory walked to his car, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was on the right path. And for now, that was enough. The boardroom of Meridian Financial Services was silent, the tension palpable as the members of the Internal Audit Committee exchanged looks. At the head of the table, CEO Marcus Blackwell's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "Let me get this straight," he growled, glaring at the head auditor. "You're telling me that 2 of our employees have been embezzling funds for over a year, and we're just now finding out about it?" The auditor, a thin man named Jenkins, swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. The scheme was quite sophisticated, but once we received the anonymous tip and knew where to look, the evidence was overwhelming." Blackwell's fist came down hard on the table, making everyone jump. "I want names. Now." "Natasha Reed and James Humphrey, sir, from the Accounts Receivable Department." Across town, oblivious to the storm about to break over their heads, Natasha and James were having lunch at their favorite cafe. Natasha was in the middle of regaling James with her latest verbal sparring match with Gregory when her phone buzzed. "Probably Jameson again," she said with a roll of her eyes. "That man is relentless. I swear, if Greg would just—" Her voice trailed off as she read the message. All the color drained from her face. "Natasha?" James leaned forward, concern etching his features. "What is it?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to go. Now." But it was too late. As they stood to leave, 2 men in dark suits approached their table. "Ms. Reed? Mr. Humphrey? I'm Agent Thompson with the FBI. We need you to come with us." The next few days were a blur of interrogations, accusations, and crushing realizations. The evidence against them was insurmountable. Not only were they fired from Meridian, but they were now facing serious criminal charges. As Natasha sat in her lawyer's office, listening to him outline the potential plea deals and prison sentences, her mind wandered to Gregory. How had it all gone so wrong? The affair, which had seemed so exciting and liberating, now felt like the biggest mistake of her life. Meanwhile, Gregory was in his classroom, wrapping up a particularly engaging lesson on the civil rights movement when Tom Halsey appeared at the door. "Greg, can I see you for a moment?" Gregory's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. But as he stepped into the hallway, he was surprised to see Tom smiling. "I've got good news," Tom said. "Not only are we keeping you on, but we want to offer you a permanent position, full benefits, tenure track, the works." Gregory blinked, stunned. Are you serious?" Tom nodded. "Your work these past few months has been exceptional. The students love you, the parents respect you, and quite frankly, we'd be idiots to let you go. So, what do you say?" For a moment, Gregory couldn't speak. All the stress, all the uncertainty of the past months came crashing down, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and vindication. Yes. Of course, yes. Thank you, Tom." As Gregory walked back to his classroom, his phone buzzed. It was Michael. "It's over, Greg. Natasha's lawyer called. They're accepting our original settlement offer. With everything that's happened, she's in no position to fight anymore." Gregory leaned against the wall, letting the news wash over him. It was finally, truly over. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. Gregory finalized the divorce, signed his new contract with the school, and even managed to find a slightly larger apartment that he could now afford. As he settled into his new life, Gregory found himself reflecting on the tumultuous journey he'd been through, the betrayal, the pain, the uncertainty. It had all shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, as he was preparing for his classes, an idea struck him. He quickly jotted down some notes, a spark of excitement growing as the concept took shape. The next day, he approached Tom with a proposal, an elective course on financial literacy and ethics. Tom raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting combination. Gregory nodded eagerly. I know it sounds odd, but think about it. So many of our students graduate without any real understanding of how to manage their money or navigate the ethical challenges of the adult world. This course could change that. Tom considered for a moment, then smiled. You know what? Let's do it. If anyone can make finance and ethics exciting for teenagers, it's you, Greg. As the new school year began, Gregory found himself standing in front of a packed classroom. Students had flocked to his new elective, curious about the unorthodox combination of topics. Welcome to Financial Literacy and Ethics 101, Gregory began, looking out at the sea of eager faces. In this class, we're going to learn about more than just balancing checkbooks and understanding credit scores. We're going to explore the complex relationship between money and morality, and how the choices we make can impact not just our bank accounts, but our integrity. As he launched into the first lesson, Gregory felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He was using his pain, his experience, to help these young people avoid the pitfalls he'd encountered. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but in many ways, it was better. Months passed, and Gregory found himself settling into a new rhythm. His course was a hit, with students and parents alike praising its practical and ethical approach. He'd made new friends among his colleagues, joined a local hiking club, and even started dabbling in photography, a hobby he'd always wanted to pursue but never found the time for during his marriage. One evening, as Gregory was grading papers in his apartment, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. I made a horrible mistake. Can we talk? Natasha. Gregory stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. For a brief moment, he was transported back to that night, where his world had fallen apart. Natasha's cruel laughter as she walked out the door, the crushing realization that their 14 years together had meant nothing to her. But as quickly as the memories came, they faded. Gregory looked around his apartment, at the stacks of student papers, the photography books on his coffee table, the hiking boots by the door. This was his life now, hard-won and honest. With a small, rueful smile, Gregory typed his reply. No, we can't. Goodbye, Natasha. He hit send, then blocked the number. For good measure, he turned off his phone entirely. Standing up, Gregory walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. A new day was ending, but for Gregory, it felt like a beginning. He grabbed his camera bag and headed for the door. There was a spot in the nearby park he'd been meaning to photograph at sunset. As he stepped outside, Gregory took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly free. Free from the shadows of betrayal. Free from the weight of a failed marriage. Free to become the man he was always meant to be. Gregory Reed walked into the gathering twilight, ready to capture the beauty of the moment and of the countless moments yet to come in his new life. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.